I'm Pablo. I'm 20. I do pool maintenance here in Southern California, nothing fancy. Just me, my truck, and a checklist of water chemistry and busted filters. Most days blur together. Chlorine levels, pH balance, brush the walls, skim the leaves. Rinse, repeat. But a few weeks ago, something shifted. It was a Tuesday. Late morning. I just finished a job in Glendale when I got a call from dispatch, routine check at a place up in the hills. I didn't think much of it. GPS led me through these winding roads where every house looked like a movie set. When I pulled up, the place was massive. Stucco, stone columns, 2 balconies. Way too clean. Like nobody actually lived there. I rang the bell and waited. I figured a house like that would have a maid or a gate code or something. Instead, she answered the door herself. Her name was Krista. Early 40s, maybe mid-long brown hair in a loose braid, white linen blouse tucked into cut-off jeans. Barefoot. No jewelry except a thin silver bracelet on her wrist. But it wasn't the way she looked that hit me. It was how she looked at me. Like she already knew me. Or had been waiting for me. I don't know. She smiled, tilted her head. You must be Pablo. Yeah. Pool tech, I said, holding up the clipboard like proof. She nodded. Come on through the gate. Everything should be unlocked. The job was nothing special. She had a saltwater system, nice equipment, crystal clear. I checked the filter, tested the water. She followed me out, stood near the patio with a tall glass in her hand. Lemonade, I think. Condensation sliding down the sides. She didn't say much at first. Just watched me work. Hot day, she said after a while, and I looked up. Yeah. Always is. You want a drink? I hesitated, then nodded. Sure. She came back with a glass, same lemonade, tart with just a little honey. We stood there by the edge of the pool, her barefoot on the stone tile, me with one hand still holding the skimmer pole. You always this quiet? She asked. I shrugged. Guess I don't talk much when I'm working. Good. Most people never shut up. That made me smile. Not sure why. Over the next 10 minutes, I noticed little things. The way she lingered. How she'd ask questions not about the pool but about me. Are you local? How long have you been doing this? What's next for you? I kept it vague. Said I wasn't sure yet. Just working for now. Saving. She nodded like she got it. Like she'd been there. Before I left, she walked me to the side gate. You come out this way, right? She asked, her hand on the latch. Yeah. She held it open, then leaned slightly against the frame. You'll be back next week? Unless you cancel the service. She smiled again. I won't. I drove off, windows down, radio low. Didn't think too hard about it at first. Just a nice client, right? But then she started popping into my head at weird times. At lunch. Driving between jobs. That smile. That lemonade. The way she said, you always this quiet? And the next week, when I got the same address on my schedule, I felt something in my chest. Not nerves, exactly. Just, something. When I got there, she was already outside. Sunglasses this time. Same lemonade. Same warmth. Miss me? She joked. I laughed and shook my head, but something about her made my hands shake when I dipped the test strips in the water. The next few visits followed a rhythm, me showing up with my gear, her already outside, usually with a glass in hand and that same soft smile. But every time, something shifted, just slightly. One time I was brushing the side walls, she asked, "Do you always work this hard for strangers?" I laughed it off, said something dumb like, "It's the chemicals. Gotta respect the chemistry." She smiled but didn't break eye contact. "I like that," she said quietly, then walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of what she said exactly, but because of how she said it. Like we weren't strangers anymore. The fourth visit, she didn't just linger, she stayed. She sat at the patio table with a book open but barely touched it. Every so often, she'd ask something personal, favorite music, where I went to school, if I still lived with my parents. It felt like a normal conversation, but under the surface, there was something else. Something that made my stomach flutter. At one point, she said, "You ever feel like people don't really see you? Like you're just background noise?" I froze for a second. That hit too close. "Yeah," I said, and meant it. She looked at me differently after that. Eventually, she stopped pretending to read. She started coming out just to talk. One visit, she asked what kind of food I liked. I said I wasn't picky. She laughed and said, "That's a terrible answer. You've got to have at least one favorite." Then she said, "You should stay for dinner sometime. I make a killer roasted chicken." I thought she was joking. So I laughed. But she didn't. She just waited. So I said, "Sure. Yeah. That'd be nice." We didn't talk about it again that visit. She just gave me a look when I left, like we had an agreement that didn't need repeating. And the next week, when I showed up, she already had something simmering on the stove. The smell hit me the second I walked through the side gate. Garlic, rosemary, lemon. It felt like walking into someone's life. Like I belonged there. I stayed after work that day. She poured wine, which I said I wasn't really used to drinking. She grinned and poured it anyway. We ate at the small round table near the sliding doors. The pool lights cast this soft blue hue across the walls, and for a second, I forgot why I was even there. We talked more that night than we ever had. She told me she used to be a photographer. That she stopped when her marriage fell apart, and just never picked it back up. I told her I hadn't planned on doing pool work forever, but I liked it more than I expected. She smiled at that, like she understood. At one point, I mentioned I hadn't been to the ocean in years, even though I live so close. She looked at me like that was a crime. "You want to go now?" she said, out of nowhere. "What? Right now?" She nodded. "Why not?" So we went. No plan, no swimsuits, nothing. Just her keys and my worn-out sneakers. We drove down the one in her car, windows down, neither of us talking much. When we got there, the beach was nearly empty. Just the sound of the waves and the faint glow from the moon. She stood near the water, arms crossed, then looked at me and said, "I haven't done this in a long time." "What? The beach?" "No," she said, turning to me. "This. Just being with someone. Not wanting anything. Just being." I didn't know what to say. So I said the only true thing I had, "Me neither." We sat on the sand, and I don't know how long we stayed. Long enough to see the sky start to shift, the first hints of pink along the edge of the water. The breeze picked up, and she leaned into me without asking, her head on my shoulder like it had always belonged there. I didn't touch her. I didn't move. I just sat there, breathing in the salt in her hair and something else I couldn't name. Eventually, she whispered, "You make me feel like I could still misbehave." And I swallowed hard, because yeah, she made me feel the same. We drove back in silence. Not awkward. Just full. Like whatever was between us had crossed some line, and we both knew it. But neither of us said a word. I dropped her off, and she didn't ask me to stay. Just said, "Thank you for saying yes." Then walked inside. I sat in my truck for a long time after that. The seat still warm from her. My heart still racing. I didn't know what this was. But it didn't feel small. The next morning, I woke up with sand in my shoes and that lemony scent from her kitchen still clinging to my hoodie. I didn't even know what day it was until my phone buzzed with a new job. But my head was somewhere else, still on that beach, still hearing her voice. You make me feel like I could still misbehave. I wasn't supposed to go back that week. She wasn't due for another service call until Tuesday. But Sunday afternoon, while I was reorganizing the back of my truck, I got a text from her. Pool's fine, but I made too much pasta. Hungry? I stared at it for a full minute. I should have said no. I said, on my way. When I got there, she opened the door barefoot, hair pulled up, apron tied around her waist. There was flour on her hands. The house smelled like tomatoes and garlic and fresh basil. You cook too? I asked. She laughed. Only when I'm avoiding everything else. We ate in the living room this time, plates balanced on our laps, a jazz record spinning in the background. She had this big, soft throw blanket draped over the couch, and at some point, without thinking, I moved closer. Just enough that our knees touched. She didn't move away. Neither did I. After we cleared the plates, we ended up back on the couch, closer this time. The record had ended. All I could hear was the clock ticking and the soft rustle of her sleeve when she shifted. She looked at me, really looked, and said, I wasn't planning on this. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. Me either, I said. And then she did something small, something subtle. She reached for my hand. That was it. No fireworks. No music swell. Just her fingers sliding over mine, slow and certain, like she'd been waiting for the right moment. Her hand was warm. Softer than I expected. We sat there like that for what felt like forever. I didn't try to move it anywhere else. Neither did she. Just that touch, that quiet confirmation that something had shifted. Finally, she leaned her head back against the couch and whispered, I've been lonely, Pablo. Not just the quiet kind. The kind where even when someone's next to you, you still feel cold. I didn't know what to say. So I said the truth. I know that kind. She turned her head slightly, her eyes finding mine again. You're not afraid of this? I am, I said. But not enough to walk away. That night, we didn't kiss. We didn't even hug. But when I left, she walked me to the door, and as I stepped outside, she said, come back. Not just for the pool. I nodded. Okay. And I did. Not every day. But enough that it became a pattern. We made no rules. No promises. Just this understanding that when we were in that house together, the rest of the world didn't exist. Sometimes we watched old movies on her projector, black and white stuff with subtitles and long silences. Other times we sat on the floor of her kitchen drinking tea while the dishwasher hummed in the background. She told me about her old gallery in San Francisco, how she lost it during the divorce. I told her about my mom's garden, and how the only thing I was ever good at in school was biology. Once, she took my hand across the kitchen counter and said, you have this way of making me forget how much time has passed. I didn't know how to answer that. So I just squeezed her hand. But it wasn't always easy. Some nights, I'd lie awake in my apartment wondering what I was doing. She was in her 40s. She had a life. A real one, with scars and silence and a history I didn't know. And I was just a guy with pool chemicals and calloused hands. But then I'd hear her voice in my head, that soft, steady tone, you're not afraid of this? And I'd remember how good it felt to be seen. Not admired. Not crushed on. Seen. The truth is, I didn't feel like a kid when I was with her. I felt like myself. And I think she felt that too. That's why, one night, maybe 2 weeks into whatever this was, she did kiss me. No warning. No signal. We were sitting on her back steps, just watching the pool lights flicker in the dark. She turned to me, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and said, "I keep telling myself this shouldn't be happening." I looked at her. And then I stopped talking. And I just want to be here. And then she leaned in, slow, careful, like she wasn't sure if I'd meet her halfway. I did. That kiss, it wasn't wild or fast. It was quiet. Deep. Full of things neither of us had the words for. When we pulled back, she didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just sat there. And held hands in the dark. After that night on the steps, things between us changed, not in a dramatic way. It was subtle. Softer. But undeniable. Like we'd crossed into a new room and closed the door behind us. I kept going back. She never asked me to, not directly. But she didn't have to. I'd get a text in the morning, "Pool looks good today," and I'd know it meant something else. Or I'd just show up, and she'd already have the kettle on. Our routines became rituals. She'd bake sometimes, just simple things like banana bread or lemon scones, and we'd eat them in silence or while she read something aloud from a book of poetry she liked. I didn't always get the poems. But I liked the sound of her voice. Sometimes I'd help her with little things around the house, tightening a cabinet handle, lifting boxes to the attic, fixing a light switch. She'd hover nearby, always watching. Always close. But the ocean night was the only time we kissed, until one Friday evening when I came by after work just to drop off a part I'd replaced for the filter. I wasn't supposed to stay. I told myself I wouldn't even step inside. Just a quick handoff and I'd go. But when she opened the door, she looked tired. Not in a worn-out way, more like quiet. Her hair was damp, she wore this gray sweater with the sleeves tugged over her hands. No makeup. Just her. "You want to come in?" she asked. I hesitated. Then nodded. Inside, the lights were low. One lamp in the corner of the living room, casting this amber glow. A record was playing again, Chet Baker, I think. Something slow, something aching. We sat on the couch, and at first, we didn't talk. She had her knees pulled up under her, one hand wrapped around a mug. Mine rested on my lap, fidgeting with my keys. After a while, she spoke. I used to think getting older would make things clearer. I looked at her. And? She smiled, sad and small. It just makes the silence louder. I didn't know how to respond to that. But I reached out and placed my hand over hers. She looked down at it, then back at me. That's when she leaned forward and kissed me again. And this time, she didn't pull back. Her hand found my cheek, and mine slid to her waist. It wasn't fast. It wasn't wild. It was slow and aching and honest. We didn't say much after. We stayed there on the couch, limbs tangled, hearts racing but still. And when it got late and I finally stood up, she walked me to the door and said quietly, "You don't have to knock next time." I didn't sleep that night. Not because of guilt. But because I kept replaying every second of it, her breath, her voice, the way her fingers traced mine without even realizing it. It kept happening after that. Never with a plan. Never discussed in advance. But slowly, quietly, we kept returning to each other. Like the world made more sense when we were in the same room. We didn't use labels. Didn't call it a relationship. But it was something. Real. Intimate. Secret. She'd brush her fingers over my arm when we passed each other in the kitchen. I'd leave her notes sometimes, just a word or two scribbled on the back of her service receipt. Good coffee. Nice book. You. We didn't talk about the future. We didn't talk about anyone else. Once, I asked her why she wasn't seeing anyone. She looked at me for a long time and said, "Because I don't want to be seen by just anyone." And I think that's when I knew I'd already fallen. I didn't try to tell her. I wouldn't have known how. But I started finding reasons to stay longer after each visit. Started keeping her house for last on my route. We made each other feel real. Not perfect. Just real. And for a while, that was enough. But there was always a shadow in the corner of the room. We didn't talk about it, but we both knew it was there. I started wondering what people would think if they knew. If my friends found out. If her neighbors asked questions. If someone at my job said something. And I think, maybe, so did she. The last time I saw her pool, the water was perfectly still. No wind. No leaves. Just the reflection of the sky and a single cloud drifting slowly across the surface. I remember standing there with the net in my hand, not moving. Just watching the water. I hadn't seen her in a week. No texts. No calls. Nothing. At first, I thought maybe she was out of town. Then I wondered if maybe I'd done something wrong. Said too much. Stayed too long. But when I rang the bell that afternoon, she answered. Hair pulled back. Button-down shirt. No makeup. She looked beautiful, of course, but something in her eyes was different. Distant. She didn't invite me in. I just need a quick service today, Pablo, she said, her voice polite. Businesslike. Nothing major. Okay, I said, trying not to let the shift hit too hard. I worked quietly. She stayed inside. When I finished, I tapped on the glass door. She came out and handed me a check, already filled out. No conversation. No lemonade. Just silence. You okay? I asked. She looked at me, eyes soft but unreadable. Then nodded. I'm fine. I waited, hoping she'd say more. Hoping she'd let me back in. But she didn't. I left. That night, I sat on my balcony with my phone in my hand, scrolling through old texts, not sending any. The messages were still there. The quiet jokes, the casual check-ins. But now they just looked like echoes. I didn't go back the next week. She didn't call. And I didn't want to push. Didn't want to be the one who didn't understand the unspoken rules of an ending. Because that's what it felt like. Not a fight. Not a falling out. Just this quiet unraveling, like the warmth between us had started to cool. I told myself it made sense. She was older. She had a history. I had none. She had a home. I still shared an apartment with two guys who thought Gatorade and chips counted as groceries. She probably saw the difference more clearly than I ever could. And maybe she was protecting something. Herself. Or me. Because the more we leaned into each other, the more we both had to lose. I kept working, kept my head down. Tried to convince myself it had been a one-time thing. A beautiful, strange month that didn't need a sequel. But at night, I'd still see the shape of her in the dark. Still hear the way she said, "You don't have to knock next time." And I never did. Because the next time never came. Eventually, my dispatcher pulled her house from my route. Said she'd requested to pause service. No explanation. I nodded like it was nothing. But inside, something tugged. I thought about writing her a letter. Something simple. Honest. But every version I drafted felt like it said too much or not enough. So I didn't send one. I didn't do anything. Just kept moving. Weeks turned into months. I started taking more shifts, trying to stretch the hours and keep my head full. It worked, most days. But sometimes, I'd drive past her neighborhood without meaning to. My hands would turn the wheel before my brain caught up. I never saw her. And I told myself that was better. Cleaner. Safer. But the truth is, I missed her. Not in the dramatic way. Not like some lost love. Just quietly. Deeply. Like missing the way your name sounds when someone special says it. The way she used to look at me like I mattered. Like I wasn't just a kid with a skimmer pole and a name tag. She never treated me like I was temporary. And maybe that's what made it hurt. Because now, it felt like I had been. By the end of that year, I'd memorized how to stop thinking about her. You just fill the silence. That's all. You take the early shifts. Volunteer for the late ones. You pick up weekend routes in towns you've never serviced before, just so you don't have to drive past a certain hill, a certain street, a certain house with a pool that probably doesn't shimmer the way it used to. And when someone asks how you're doing, you say, good. Busy. And they believe you. Because mostly, it's true. Mostly. But then, of course, life doesn't let you get away clean. It was a Saturday in March. I just finished a maintenance job for a newer client in Brentwood and stopped into this grocery store to grab something quick. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I usually shop closer to home. But I'd skipped lunch, and the small deli at the back had these overpriced but solid sandwiches. I remember I was standing near the refrigerated drinks, reaching for something with caffeine, when I heard a laugh. Light. Familiar. Like music I hadn't heard in months but knew every note of. I turned, and there she was. Krista. Same brown hair, though now she wore it loose around her shoulders. A soft cream sweater, jeans, her sunglasses pushed up on her head. She had a small tote bag slung over her shoulder. She looked the same. But also not. There was something in her eyes, tired maybe, or careful. She hadn't seen me yet. She was talking to a woman near the produce section, probably someone she knew. Her posture was easy, like she belonged there. I didn't move. I just watched. And then, as if pulled by some invisible thread, her eyes slid across the room, and found me. She didn't flinch. Didn't smile. She just looked. And I swear, for a second, I felt everything I'd tried to forget crash back into place. The porch light. The smell of rosemary in her kitchen. The sound of her laugh when I told her the wrong name for a flower. All of it. She gave me a small nod. Not polite. Not distant. Just, there. Present. And I nodded back. That was it. We didn't talk. She didn't walk over. Neither did I. But later, when I was leaving, brown paper bag under my arm, I saw her again in the parking lot. She was loading her groceries into the trunk. And this time, she saw me clearly. Not just in passing. Our eyes met. And she smiled. Small. Familiar. The kind that doesn't ask for anything, doesn't offer promises. Just acknowledges a truth that never really stopped being true. I didn't go to her. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But my feet stayed still. And when she closed her trunk, she gave me one last look. One that said, I remember. And then she drove away. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay there staring at the ceiling, her face flickering behind my eyelids every time I blinked. I didn't know what I wanted. Closure? A second chance? All I knew was that she looked the same, and different, and I wasn't over any of it. Maybe I never would be. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I haven't seen her. Not at the store. Not by accident. Not in any of the usual places where you run into people you're not sure you're supposed to run into. But she's stayed with me. Not in a dramatic way. I don't replay every word or romanticize what we had. I just feel her. Still. Like a room in my mind that never got repainted. It's just there, same shade of warm light, same faint scent of her citrus lotion in the air. Some nights, I dream I'm back at her house, sitting on her kitchen floor with my legs crossed and a mug of tea in my hand. She's in that oversized cardigan she wore on rainy days. No makeup. Her voice barely above a whisper. She says something simple, like, "It's okay if you stay a while." And I believe her. Other nights, I wake up feeling like I missed something. Like I was supposed to do more. Say more. I never told anyone. Not my coworkers. Not my roommate. Not even the guy who trained me, who I usually talk to about everything. It didn't feel like something you could explain without breaking it. Or making it feel smaller than it was. Because it was something. And no matter how quiet it ended, it mattered. Sometimes I still get the urge to text her. I've never deleted her number. It's still in my phone, tucked under, hillside. My thumb will hover over the message box for a few seconds, long enough to type, "Hey, you crossed my mind today," and then I'll backspace it all. Because what would it change? She made her decision. And maybe that's what love is, in some form. Letting someone go gently. Not because you didn't care, but because you cared enough not to hold them somewhere they didn't want to stay. Still. I find myself driving past the edge of that neighborhood sometimes. I don't mean to. It just happens. And every time, I slow down. Just a little. Just in case. Because there's this tiny part of me, this stupid, stubborn part, that wonders what would happen if I knocked again. Not as her pool guy. Not as someone who filled in the silence during a lonely month. But as Pablo. The guy who saw her. The guy who still does. Would she open the door? Would she smile the way she did that first time? Would she say, "You're late. I made lemonade," and mean it? I don't know. I don't know if I have the right to knock on her door again. But when she looked at me in that grocery store, when her eyes softened just for that second, it felt like everything inside me turned upside down. And now? Now it feels like I'm standing on the edge again.